Everybody hear me? All right, good morning. It's still morning, right? Well, it's great to be here. It's an honor to be here today on behalf of Koch Industries and Charles Koch. And I want to thank the First Lady and the Governor for being so gracious, for inviting me and for the wonderful dinner last night. And met a number of people last night, community activists and others in government, people trying to do the right thing and help people improve their lives, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. I want to give a specific shout out to your wonderful, I was really floored by your director of your corrections and rehabilitation, Leanne Birch, phenomenal, and she really gets it. So give her a big round of applause if she's here or not. And I wish Leanne was the Attorney General of the United States, but that's another matter. But I'm really excited to be here, and I thank you for all being here, because this is what needs to happen. We've got a meeting of passionate people seeking comprehensive reforms through best practices. It's exactly the right approach to the multifaceted issues that we face when we look at both our criminal justice system and substance abuse. Okay, good. We got the slide up. I'm here to discuss criminal justice reform. It's an issue that I have personally had a passion for since my teenage years. I'll explain that. And one that my company and our CEO, Charles Koch, have an extreme passion for, and been working on this for many, many years now. I've been with the company 22 years. And at Koch, we're very focused on removing barriers to opportunity, both internal and external. So when you think about that, our external barriers like the criminal justice system are huge barriers to opportunity for millions of Americans, particularly the least advantaged. And then if you look at addiction, that's another internal barrier to opportunity. And today, we're going to talk about the nexus between them with incarceration and addiction, substance abuse. And I'll just say this, and we're going to do it more deeply. There is no way on earth we can ever incarcerate ourselves out of this issue. It's just not going to work. It won't work. It hasn't worked. And I'm going to talk about the war on drugs in a little bit, but it's not going to work. Drugs are going to win again, trust me, unfortunately. But as everyone knows, there is a strong correlation between poverty, substance abuse, and incarceration. Some estimate it's 65% nationally. From what I heard from the governor today, you're at 75%. Where I'm from in Worcester, Massachusetts, it's probably 90%, I don't know. But those in prison, incarcerated people, it's a huge issue. It's a major reason why they're incarcerated. And we all know that prisons are not the place for people to get better, usually, particularly people with drug addiction issues or mental health issues. It is not the optimal place to get treatment and recover. Prison, by and large, makes things much worse, makes everything worse in a lot of ways. Brian Stevenson, I don't know if you all have heard of him, Just Mercy, an amazing book. He's the director of the Equal Justice Initiative. And he says to care about an issue and to be able to remedy it, you must be proximate both to the issue, the cause, and the remedy. So I was proximate to the criminal justice system from a young age. Growing up in Worcester, Massachusetts, it's a working class town. I kind of have working class background. And my hometown of Worcester, the best job I ever had before I went to law school was as a prison guard. And I did that to pay for college. And it was there that I caught up with a number of people that I lost track of who I went to junior high and high school with. And what had happened was they weren't working there. They were put away. They were incarcerated. And these were kids I went to school with, went to church with. They grew up in my neighborhood. The only difference I could tell between me and them was that I didn't get caught doing the really stupid things that teenage boys do, and they did. And I had better parents. And that's not to say that people who go to prison didn't have good parents. I'm just saying my circumstances. That's what I saw. And it was really one of those there before the grace of God go I moments at an early age. And there I saw firsthand the injustice of the system and just the sheer lunacy of treating low-level offenders as if they're criminals. And over time, they became criminals to support their issues, to support their addictions. And the bottom line was, when they got out of prison, they couldn't get jobs because they didn't have an education. They didn't have parents that made them go to school like mine did sometimes. They made them work like mine did sometimes. It made me go to church like mine did a lot of times. They didn't have that. And my parents kept me accountable. And had they not done that, I could have easily been in their shoes, the people who were in prison. And my classmates weren't as lucky as that, and they didn't have anyone to kick their butt when they needed it. And some of them got caught up with the wrong crowd, the wrong people, the wrong issues, became addicted to drugs, and did the type of things drug addicts do to feed their addiction. And they were locked up, sometimes for many years. A couple of them are still in prison. One got life in prison. He really graduated to be a murderer, which is not good. But when they did get out, the ones who did get out, they couldn't get a job. And they couldn't find a way back into society. So there are many people like my former classmates who end up on the streets, stuck in a cycle of poverty, despair, and hopelessness. That's been going on for 35, 40 years, so we need to reverse that script. And I want to talk about our current criminal justice system leads to so many suboptimal outcomes, non-productive outcomes. And among the worst, in my opinion, is how it traps people in hopelessness, even when they've paid their debt to society, because we never forgive the debt. This is not justice in any way, shape, or form. It is literally the opposite of justice. The definition of justice is just behavior or treatment, a concern for justice, peace, and genuine respect. There is nothing about our prison system, by and large, that does any of that. People with criminal records often continue to pay the debt for the rest of their lives due to the pernicious, that's a fancy word for terrible, collateral consequences of a criminal record that are imposed by the government. People with criminal records are kept from certain jobs, housing, licenses, and other basic needs. In the state of North Dakota, there are about 535 collateral consequences to a criminal conviction. And these one-size-fits-all restrictions are unjust and unfair, and they lead many to feel as if they can never be part of the American dream. This is immoral. It's fundamentally wrong, and it's at odds with the notion that man should never place a period where God has placed a comma. People who have had a brush with the system, by and large, they want to succeed. They're hungry for it, and they can succeed if we give them a chance. And they've earned that chance. But to do otherwise, that just harms society, all of us, and our economy, as I'm going to talk about. And it denies individuals the freedom they have worked to regain, and that they should be able to regain. Again, quoting Brian Stevenson, he sums it up quite succinctly. We need to have humility, as the governor mentioned. Humility and courage are absolutely essential for anything. But Brian Stevenson puts it this way: each of us is more than the worst thing we have ever done. And that recognition will lead people to open their hearts and minds to men and women who are trying to start over and need a second chance. And I might say that many of the people who need a second chance, a lot of them never really had a first chance, if we want to be honest about it. So they deserve that second chance. So I'd like to first lay out several of the ramifications of our current criminal justice system. I want to talk about why reform of our system will strengthen our long-term success as a nation. Talk about what you've done here in the state, the key opportunities to make reforms that you've made, and what I see as a bright future for you all if you are willing to be bold and let mighty forces come to your aid. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies, Almost Famous. So, our current challenges stem from the fact that we've been operating under really bad mental models and false assumptions. We've assumed that if we lock someone up, we've dealt with the problem. We haven't. In reality, we've just delayed the issue or made it a lot worse. We need to change how we deal with crime, and we need to change how we deal with individuals who get caught up in the system. We need to be able to differentiate between people that we're mad at and then people we're afraid of. To do that, we must have the humility to admit over the past 4 decades that how we dealt with certain crimes and certain offenders needs to change dramatically. And at its root, that's what I think the criminal justice movement is really all about. Admitting that for decades we've used the same formula repeatedly to deal with criminal justice. Some of it's worked, but most of it hasn't, and still others have made it worse. And now it's time to be honest with ourselves. Our current criminal justice system, with no disrespect to anybody involved in that system, now or in the past, in many ways, it's the epitome of a failed big government program. It really is. It's a top-down approach. It wastes billions of dollars each year and fails to adequately do the only things that a real criminal justice system should do, which are enhancing public safety, keeping people safe, and then giving worthy individuals another chance to succeed, which enhances public safety by decreasing and reducing recidivism, which keeps law enforcement safer, which is a huge thing. We all need to realize that. Law enforcement has a huge stake in this as well. The things that we've made them do in our name, in the war on drugs, it put them at risk. It's caused strife with the communities. We've seen that again and again. So we need to fix all that for law enforcement, for the communities, for the accused, for victims, everybody, all our society. And we need to look at what's been holding us back and holding back millions of people who have an imperfect past, and I think we all do. But those who have a criminal record and yet are still treated after they've paid their debt to society, if they have a scarlet letter for F tattooed on their forehead for eternity, keeping them out of jobs, housing, etc. At Koch, we look at this issue, the criminal justice system, in 3 different dimensions. First is the moral dimension. By and large, as I mentioned, it is a rigged and unfair system, the criminal justice system. It's a 2-tiered system. The rich and guilty get much better treatment than the poor and innocent. People plead guilty every single day in the United States to things they didn't do because they can't afford to fight the government. They don't have a lawyer, not a real lawyer who can work on their case all the time. I love public defenders. I'm a big fan of the Sixth Amendment, but we don't fund those. And so they end up pleading guilty to things they didn't do. That's not me saying that. That's several federal judges, including Judge Rakoff in the Southern District of New York, who's a liberal, and Judge Kaczynski in the Ninth Circuit, who's a conservative. How can any of us be comfortable with that? That's totally against our culture and our system. And we've created a situation where prosecutors have all the power, and it creates a poverty trap with enormous barriers to opportunity to disadvantage. Next, the constitutional case, pretty simple. The Bill of Rights, 40% of it deals with criminal justice issues. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. Our founding fathers, who got a lot of things wrong, nailed this one. They were telling us the greatest threat to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness was going to come through the criminal justice system. They'd seen it in the countries they came from, and we're seeing it now. We need to heed their warning. We haven't. Lastly, we look at it through the fiscal case. The fiscal case is actually the moral case, and it's why reform has happened. It's why governors like Governor Burgum, other governors throughout the United States in the last 10 years, they get into office. They can't kick the can down the road like the federal government does. They're accountable. They look at their budgets. They look at the bloated resources devoted to corrections, and that's when change begins, because you peel back the numbers. You peel back who is in prison. Why are they in prison? Are there less costly ways to deal with it, both for society and the individual and the family and the communities? And the answer is always yes. And so the fiscal case is the moral case, because if you're not locking up people who don't need to be in prison, who aren't a threat to public safety, and if you're keeping people in prison less time, not longer time, when they become healthy and can get back into society, have them in as soon as possible. If you do all those things, you save a lot of money. And you can spend that on education, on roads, infrastructure, essential services, whatever it is. In Texas, red state Texas, Hang 'em High, Texas, they've closed 8 prisons in the last 6 years. They started this revolution in 2007, Governor Rick Perry. So instead of incarceration, many individuals could benefit from drug rehabilitation and treatment, including identifying and treating incarcerated individuals suffering from drug addiction by providing evidence-based treatment, as well as drug education and meaningful drug prevention programs. I read that verbatim because that was in the CARA legislation last year in Congress, Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. Now, that makes a lot of sense. It made so much sense it was passed pretty much unanimously through Congress and signed into law by President Obama. And you know, whenever there's overwhelming bipartisan support, it has to be a big problem. So that's a good thing, the way we treated that issue. We treated the opioid epidemic, and it's a huge issue, as you all know better than me up here. We're treating it like a public health issue, which is what addiction is. There are criminal elements involved in it potentially, but not the addicts, not even the low-level offenders. And so if you're fighting that war against the addicts, low-level offenders, you're never going to win. The second false assumption we've made is that a top-down approach will solve local crises. I think it's crises. Anyway, sorry. I usually don't read this thing. Now I'm getting obsessed with it. One primary erroneous assumption we made was that the war on drugs could be won through locking up offenders, including low-level nonviolent drug offenders. Big mistake. Drugs won the war on drugs. Drugs will win every rematch. In fact, illegal drug usage now is at a higher level, both in absolute numbers and level of usage, than it was when the war on drugs started. We've spent untold trillions of dollars, ruined untold millions of lives, but drugs are always going to win that battle. And there are many individuals involved in the drug trade that need to be dealt with, and harshly to our criminal justice system. But most of the people who get targeted and put in prison aren't that, quite frankly. And so when I hear the Attorney General talk about refighting the war on drugs, don't do it. Dumb idea. We had that. And I don't know if you guys all aren't old enough to remember Saturday Night Live, C. Martin, Theodoric of York, medieval barber, who tried to cure everything through leeches, and all his patients died. I kind of feel this is what it's got a similar feel, only it's not funny, it's real. We're going to waste more time, money, resources, and not get to the root of the problems, and not do what the states are doing, which is getting to the roots of the problems. Because locking up low-level users and low-level offenders, it's not going to address the big issues, public health issues, the mental health issues, or the lack of opportunity in a lot of communities that leads people to make the decision to sell drugs in the first place. And I am not excusing illegal drug selling or anything else, but let's be real about it, all right? And the war on drugs actually created or exacerbated a whole host of other problems through incarceration and the lifelong burdens of a criminal record. And this top-down approach, it's built on a lot of government bureaucracy and outdated rules and non-science-based thinking than anything that's based on evidence-based results and solutions. Most of our criminal justice policies are born of the fear and emotion that reigned during the 80s and 90s with crack cocaine, angel dust, you name it, and the dangerous drugs that created violence and poverty that plagued major cities. I lived in D.C. at the time. I get it. It was bad. It was bipartisan that we needed to do something, and they did. But fear and emotion is never a good way to make any decision, be it your personal life, your professional life, business life, and definitely when you're making decisions about locking people up and crime and punishment. Fear and emotion got us into this mess through mandatory minimums. And if you ask any prosecutor, the best they can say is maybe 25% to 30% of the reduction in crime from 1980 to the present is due to mandatory minimums. But they all admit there's no science to uphold that. Yet we still let this happen. It's just wrong. And there's no real data to support that, but there is data to support what the states are doing and what you all are starting to do. Data-driven and evidence-based reforms have made such progress in the 30 plus states that have done it. They've reduced crime rates and they've reduced incarceration rates and they've saved money. What did our 80s and 90s policies lead to? Well, we've got a ridiculously long list of criminal laws, criminal codes. We've allowed the government, both state and federal, to create thousands and thousands and thousands of laws and regulations. The number of federal and state criminal laws has exponentially just blossomed and will continue to do so, it seems. Federal criminal laws, we started out our country in the Constitution with 3 federal criminal laws. By 1900, there were a few dozen. By the start of the war on drugs in the early 80s, 3,000. Now there's an estimated 4,500 to 6,000 federal criminal laws. I say estimated because the government has asked, Congress has asked the Bureau of Justice Statistics at least 2 times to tabulate the exact number of federal criminal statutes that exist, and the response has been, Ben, we can't do it, it's too hard. Only in D.C. is that an acceptable answer. What would you do if your kid did that about his math homework, right? And that's not even talking about the 300,000 plus federal regulations. That's another estimate because no one's ever thought to go through it and count those as well. What do we have to show for this? Well, right now, today, 1 in 3 people in the United States, 1 in 3 adults, have some type of criminal record. That means that we have more people in our country, 1 in 3, have a criminal record than have college degrees. That's what we've become. We have around 2 million people in prison, give or take. That number will probably go up. America has 5% of the world population, 25% of the world's prison population. Number 1 in terms of absolute numbers of people in prison, and number 1 of any industrialized nation. And I'm not take Russia and China out of it because their numbers are wrong. I'm talking about the countries we should be comparing ourselves to. By comparison, that is an 850% increase in the overall federal inmate population from the start of the war on drugs, and a 500% increase if you include the states. I Do not think that's what we're talking about when we say we want to make America great again. Today, as I said, 1 in 3 adults have a criminal record. 1 in 100 adults are imprisoned. When you combine the number of people incarcerated with those under probation or supervised release, 1 in 31 adults in the United States are under some type of correctional control. We spend over $250 billion a year on our criminal justice system. From 1990 to 2005, on average, the United States built a new state or federal prison or jail every 10 days. We spend at least $80 billion a year annually on incarceration. That's 3 to 4 times more per capita on average than we spend annually on education in this country. And so, as I like to say, if you are what you eat, you're definitely what you spend. And from these numbers, we can conclude we care more about locking people up than we do educating them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but, you know, Rasheed Wallace used to always say, ball don't lie, money don't lie. This has a profound human cost. More than 2.7 million children, that's 1 in 28 in this country, have an incarcerated parent or parents, and 10 million current children have been in the same situation at some point of their childhood. Combined, that's 1 in 14. No surprise here. Over 2/3 at least, but we don't have great data on this, are going to have their own issues in the juvenile systems and adult systems, in large part because the current criminal justice system destroys the communities and families that would otherwise be there to help them. And it also contributes to poverty. A 2009 Villanova University study concluded if we hadn't had a mass incarceration for the past 35 years, poverty would have been reduced by 20%. Our criminal justice system is literally impoverishing us. And it also hurts our economy by depriving us of jobs and economic productivity. Both the left and the right see that this is a failed big government program, and they both agree it needs to be fixed with less government, not more. This is truly bipartisan, let me tell you. Across the board, from Cory Booker to John Cornyn, everybody agrees in the Senate, and I think we're going to get it hopefully done in the next couple of years at the federal level. Luckily, with a governor like you have here, there'll probably be a lot of good things coming your ways too. Of the people who spend time behind bars, 96% re-enter society. That's about 650,000 every year. Everybody's basically coming back. But men with a criminal record represent 1/3 of working age males who are jobless. It's as if these individuals who finally got out of prison or released are now stuck to a prison without borders or time limits because every possibility is shut off to them. And this has profound human costs. In 2009, DOJ found that a criminal record of any kind reduced the likelihood of a job offer by 50%. And that's more than a statistic. A job enables individuals to provide for themselves and their families, to take responsibility, use their talents, and contribute to their community. There's dignity in work. Our founders knew this. Benjamin Franklin said, it's the working man who is the happy man, it is the idle man who is the miserable man. And as he warned, it's from idleness that trouble springs. Because individuals in need of a second chance can't find work, it not only hurts their chances to thrive, but endangers our safety. Lack of employment is one of the key reasons why more than 2/3 are rearrested, more than half are reconvicted, and 2 out of 5 are reincarcerated within 3 years of release. Our system is incredibly expensive, and it doesn't enhance public safety. We can't do this anymore. What's more, joblessness among those with a criminal record stifles our economies. A 2010 study by the Center for Economics and Policy Research estimated the annual lost economic value was between 57 billion and 65 billion. The bottom line is our criminal justice system has an immense cost, both economic, financial, and most of all human and societal. It's a cost we simply cannot afford, nor should we tolerate anymore. These are just some of the reasons why criminal justice reform is so central to achieving a more free and open society. Briefly, just don't want to get into too in the weeds on criminal justice reform generally. We think the whole system needs to be tweaked and changed, from the laws that are passed to the power of prosecutors needs to be reined in. We think that individuals have a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, and if you don't get a right to counsel, the government that's supposed to provide you that counsel should not be able to prosecute you till they get you a lawyer who can work on your case. It's in the Bill of Rights. Sentencing reform is necessary. Let judges just be the most important person in the courtroom, not the prosecutor, and let the punishment fit the crime. And lastly, I want to spend my time that I have left talking about a little bit on prison reform and then on reentry reform. Prison reform, real briefly, it's important. because the prison's only job, as the head of your corrections understands, it's to make people better, enhance public safety and make people better. That's the prison's only job. The only metric that matters is recidivism. And so reentry reform, that needs to start day one when the individual hits prison for the first time. And it needs to be comprehensive. Mental health, drug health, vocational, emotional, you name it. Educational, job training, life skills, literacy, all these things need to happen. Reentry reform, very important. The government plays a role here. It can reduce some of the collateral consequences, as I mentioned, of a criminal conviction so people can get jobs. I mean, the reality is if someone gets a job, housing, has a strong mentor, they're probably not going back to prison. Oddly, that's what keeps people out of prison to begin with. But they don't get that beforehand, they definitely need it coming out. So, as far as reentry reform, a lot of that, the good news is, as I like to say, you don't need an act of Congress. You just need an act of conscience. Because there's a lot of things private citizens can do. You don't need permission from the government to do it. One thing we've done at Coke is we hire people with criminal records. We banned the box on our employment application. We did that for a lot of reasons, but really, like most things in life, most things in society that work really well, it's all about mutual benefit. We need win-win-win solutions. So banning the box and then being willing to hire people who are formerly incarcerated is win-win-win. Going back to that statistic I showed you, 1 in 3 with a criminal record in this country, adults. So if you're going to get an application with a box on it that says, oh, check it off, and you're going to say, I can't even talk to this person, it's really short-sighted as an employer. You're limiting your applicant pool. Why would you do that? We can't do it. We've got 120,000 employees at Coke. And we've seen over the years, I've been with the company 22 years, and we've hired people with criminal records since I've been with the company. We hire people right out of prison, out of work release in Texas and in Kansas, Wichita, Kansas. What we've seen is these employees, a lot of people coming out of prison, a lot of people with criminal records, they're going after it. They're getting it. They're passionate. They're hungry. They're grateful. They're great employees. Conversely, we've hired people without criminal records, went to the best schools, great recommendations, great work experience, and they're terrible employees. They're whiny. They're entitled. They're counting the ceiling squares on their office to see how big it is. I mean, it's just, and worst of all, they're stolen from us. So, look, you need to be careful however you hire, you need to do your diligence. But a criminal record, particularly in our over-criminalized society, it shouldn't define someone forever. You should try to look past that. We've delayed that discussion until we make a conditional offer of employment to individuals, and it's worked great for us. We encourage other employers to do it, but shouldn't be mandated by the government, but it's a good thing to do. It's worked for us, is what I think and what I'd say. So I'm almost out of time here. Could you get the script going a little bit? And keep going. Keep going. Okay, I just want to finish up. Really, criminal justice reform is so key to getting our country back from a two-tiered society to a one-tiered society where everybody's treated the same. And giving second chances is an important part of that. I want to talk briefly about justice reinvestment, which is the last part of the script. Okay. What we've seen in the other states that I've talked about is all these reforms have happened that have made communities safer and saved money. So criminal justice reform actually makes you safer. There's no such thing as soft on crime. There's no such thing as tough on crime. Those are meaningless political slogans. They mean nothing. Here's what matters. You need to be smart on crime. You need to be smart on crime and soft on taxpayers. So that's what criminal justice reform really does. You all have taken a great first step in the state of North Dakota with the justice reinvestment process, so congratulations, thank you. It's really the key to starting to move the needle to reduce the size of your incarcerated communities and then hopefully be able to deal more with those who have a substance abuse problem outside of the prison setting. So really, if you look at it, this is all about transforming lives, restoring hope, and creating more for everybody and more of a thriving society. The final point, though, this year, you in North Dakota with the justice reinvestment issue, you took a big step forward, being a leader on addiction, recovery, and criminal justice issues by passing that package. With the help and technical support of the Council on State Governments, Governor Burgum and your legislature developed and enacted a very forward-thinking bill. As you probably know, addiction, as we all know here today, that's all we're talking about. It's a huge driver of prison populations. More than that, every state and the federal government is concerned with the opioid crisis and finding solutions. That's everywhere, California to Florida to Maine to Massachusetts. People are suffering from addiction across this country. For too long, we've ignored the issue until someone is in crisis. Once they are, often the criminal justice system is used as a last resort. We've talked about that, and it is the worst of all resorts, including last resorts, the criminal justice system for someone who's sick. Some states have made good strides in dealing with the confluence of these problems. New Jersey, as the First Lady mentioned, they've adopted a treatment-first approach, which has really been productive. It's not a punitive one, especially for people who are already caught up in the system. The conference comes at a perfect time here in North Dakota, with you poised to demonstrate a more effective approach. The bill you passed will, among other things, as you probably know, expand access to community-based behavioral health services to those in criminal justice system, and increase support across a range of agencies and capacities to address behavioral and addiction health interventions. And you need to be commended for that work you've done. There's still more work to do. As I said, be bold, but you have the leadership and the First Lady and the Governor, your head of corrections, many other people in your social services groups. You can get this done, and it would be great for your state. It'd save a lot of money, save a lot of lives. Your economy's doing well anyway. I think it would be even better if you could do something like this. Real quickly, promise, last thing, I really promise this. My wife told me not to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because I think it really sums up, for me, reentry reform and what it's all about. And it's Pope Francis's speech 2 years ago about in Philadelphia. Basically, he makes a moral case for it. And I tried to make the moral case for it. And I think you're here because you guys are all proximate to this issue and you know you must do better. You've got people in your community suffering. You all know that. You're doing it every day. We owe it to all our fellow Americans not to let them languish in prisons without hope, without treatment, without any possibility of redemption. And prisons need to be about redemption, rehabilitation, and reform. No more reprisal, revenge, or retribution. Can't happen anymore, in my opinion, unless someone deserves it because they're acting up in prison, but most people don't. If we didn't do that, it's going to be a monstrously immoral act and failure on our part. But I want to close with Pope Francis's wise words. And here's what he said. Life means getting our feet dirty from the dust-filled roads of life. All of us need to be cleansed, to be washed. It is painful when we see prison systems which are not concerned to care for wounds, to soothe the pain, to offer new possibilities. It is painful when we see people who think that only others need to be cleansed, purified, and do not recognize that their weariness, pain, and wounds are also the weariness, pain, and wounds of society. This time in your life can only have one purpose: to give you a hand in getting back on the right road, to give you a hand to help you rejoin society. All of us are part of that effort. All of us are invited to encourage, help, and enable your rehabilitation. A rehabilitation which everyone seeks and desires: inmates and their families, correctional authorities, social and educational programs. A rehabilitation which benefits and elevates the morale of the entire community. All of us have something we need to be cleansed of, purified from. May the knowledge of that fact inspire us to live in solidarity, to support each other, and seek the best for others. So that's it. He sums it up really well. I could have just read that and saved you a lot of time. But here's the deal. I just want everyone to remember that. Keep that in your heart. Keep doing the right thing. Thank you so much for having me here today, and may God bless all of you. Thank you.